Thank you everyone for joining us this week. Good afternoon. The top of the mind for all of us right now are the federal benefit programs that were created by the CARES Act that are set to expire on December 26th. We hope that Congress acts to provide additional support to people who are struggling through this pandemic, but it's important to us that Oregonians know about these deadlines so they can prepare as much as possible. We want people to know that we have dedicated employees who are absolutely committed to helping them find new work. With the CARES Act program scheduled to end, there are two important points for people to know about with those looming dates coming. The first is that although these programs expire on Saturday, December 26th, benefits can be claimed for the week ending December 26th, and people that have been seeking those benefits should continue to claim for that last week. Second, we can pay PUA and PEUC benefits retroactively as long as a person's initial claim is filed by December 26th and they're found to be eligible for those benefits. This week, we are emailing and calling people who are receiving PEUC or PUA benefits to remind them that these programs currently expire on December 26th. We encourage people who have exhausted their extended benefits claim as of December 13th to apply for PUA as soon as possible. Not all of those people will be eligible for PUA benefits, but many will be, and they may be able to claim PUA benefits through the week ending December 26th until that PUA program expires. With the recent expiration of high unemployment extended benefits, meaning that we went from having 20 weeks to just 13 additional weeks available under the extended benefits program, and with other economic conditions, we're now estimating as many as 70,000 Oregonians and another 2,000 people living in other states but getting benefits from the Oregon Employment Department could lose benefits if the CARES Act expires and Congress doesn't act. This is a huge number of people facing very serious circumstances. That's about 3.4% of the entire state's workforce that was in place when the pandemic began. We've looked at the composition of the people who are likely to lose benefits. About 53% of those people are female, about 47% are male, showing the disproportionate impact that this recession has had on women. In terms of age, they're generally distributed across the age spectrum, the same as regular unemployment insurance claims, but we are seeing that workers age 65 and older will be disproportionately impacted, and to a lesser degree, those that are 35 to 44 years old. And the people facing the loss of this financial support are located all over the state. Most of the people who will run out of benefits are in the most heavily populated areas, but some parts of the state are being disproportionately impacted. Curry, Coos, Lincoln, and Jackson counties are projected to be hit proportionally the hardest when the CARES Act programs end. We are watching closely the proposed legislation that might aid these 70,000 Oregonians and many, many others by expending PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, and PEUC, the programs under the CARES Act. So while we're watching the proposed legislation, it hasn't yet been passed. Extending the existing programs would be the quickest way for us to be able to get money out the door to those in need and to ensure minimal gaps in providing benefits to people. If Congress passes legislation, the president still must sign it before it becomes law. We will immediately begin working on implementing the program. How quickly we can implement new programs and get benefits to those who are eligible depends on how simple the new benefit programs are and how quickly we receive guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor and what that guidance requires us to do. The holidays may impact how quickly the U.S. Department of Labor is able to get us guidance. However, we will not be waiting, and if legislation is passed soon, as we certainly hope it will be, we'll be working through the holidays to start implementing these programs. We are not going to wait for guidance to start our work, but we'll need to get at least some guidance quickly for us to be able to quickly get benefits to the many people depending on them. And for a little bit of context, when we created the PUA program, we were able to start paying benefits, but we continued receiving guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor even weeks after we initially implemented the program. Each time that additional guidance was received, we had to stop and retool our processes. That further delayed getting benefits out to people in need, and we're hoping that that won't happen again this time. We're very hopeful that Congress will quickly pass a relief plan that is simple to implement. We know that any delay will be difficult for the many Oregonians relying on benefits, and we're dedicated to working as quickly as we can to get new benefit programs in place and to share information about the new programs so people understand what it means for them and what steps they should take to receive the new benefit funds. Looking at the overall employment and unemployment picture for Oregon, not taking into account the recent statewide freeze that took place on November 18th, which has significantly impacted employers and tens of thousands of workers in recent weeks, Oregon's unemployment rate for November did improve to 6% from where it was in October at 6.8%. And Oregon added about 4,200 jobs in November, bringing us to the point where Oregon has now recovered about 46% of the jobs that were lost over the spring. This compares with the nationwide percentage of about 56% of the jobs lost having been recovered. And while the unemployment rate is declining, so is the size of the labor force in Oregon. We believe that that decline in the unemployment rate from 6.8% to 6% is not an indicator of strong gains in the overall dynamics of our labor market, that it reflects some gains, but also that people have dropped out of the labor force, at least for now. While our situation has vastly improved from where it was just months ago, and some industries are actually doing very well, even better than before the pandemic, overall, the state continues to be in a serious recession, and some industries are still exceptionally hard hit. And we know that some individuals are also being exceptionally hard hit by this situation. Some Oregonians may be close to the end of their claim and are nearing the 1-year mark from when they first filed an initial claim for benefits, and we want to provide some direction to people in that situation about what they should do next. As a reminder, somebody's unemployment claim generally expires after 52 weeks. Even if there's a positive balance left on their expired claim, they won't be able to file a weekly claim after 52 weeks. What people in that situation can do is file a new claim for benefits. We'll then evaluate whether they are able to have a new claim. However, sometime during the 52 weeks of their expired claim, they must have worked for an employer who paid payroll taxes. We'll soon have more information on expired claims and the requirements for being able to receive benefits on a new claim on our website at unemployment.oregon.gov/expired claims. And for all the Oregonians who are looking for work, we strongly encourage you to use our WorkSource Oregon resources. This vital part of the Oregon Employment Department, and something that we work with many partners around the state to operate, connects employers looking to hire people with those looking for work. Even though our physical locations for the WorkSource Oregon offices are closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we offer phone and virtual services to help job seekers throughout the state, including workshops on interviewing, resumes, networking, and skills building. We've also held drive-through job fairs and will continue finding innovative ways to offer services to businesses and to job seekers. There are a lot of employers that are hiring, and even if they're not in the field where somebody previously worked, our employees have extensive experience helping people get back to work or in finding new careers. We encourage people who have been receiving benefits and anybody else trying to find work, regardless of whether they were seeking benefits, to reach out for support finding employment. And they can do that at worksourceoregon.gov. We'll be having another webinar about unemployment insurance. It will focus on the upcoming end of the CARES Act, federal benefit programs, expired claims, and when to file a new claim for benefits. That webinar is scheduled for 1 p.m. on Thursday, December 17th. And simultaneous interpretation will be available in simplified Chinese, Russian, Vietnamese, and Spanish. To join the live webinar, you can register online, and you can also view a recording of this webinar after it's done and all prior webinars by visiting unemployment.oregon.gov/webinars. To provide some updates on the waiting week and the other work that we're doing, so far we have paid about $280 million to about 406,000 people for the waiting week. Initially, we estimated about 170,000 people would need to have their waiting week payment manually processed, and that it might take until the end of January to get all of those payments out. Today, that number is down from 170,000 to about 10,000. That's about half of what it was last week. Many of these people are on extension programs such as PEUC or EB, and their claims are more complicated than others to get the waiting week payments issued. We are making good progress on these manual payments, though, and hope to pay the vast majority of these by the end of the month. We're also continuing to make good progress on our focus adjudication work and appear still on track to get through those claims by the end of the year. As a reminder, on September 30th, we had identified about 52,000 people whose claims needed adjudication, and we were working to resolve those. This week, of that 52,000, there are about 8,400 people remaining to have claims adjudicated. Looking at the benefits that we've provided since the pandemic began, from March 15th through December 12th, we've paid out $6.3 billion, a decade's worth of benefits. We continue to see a high number of claims being filed. During that time frame, we've had about 604,500 claims for benefits filed, compared to last year when we had just over 107,000 claims during that same time period. Despite the recent increase that we've had in new claims filing, the manual work to pay the waiting week, and a lot of other efforts underway, we've been able to remain on top of the initial processing of claims. We have about 2,700 new claims waiting to be processed, and the large majority of those are less than a week old. With the PUA program, we have paid about $421 million to just under 85,000 people. WorkShare continues to be a valuable program to a number of Oregon businesses and workers, providing support to over 1,700 employers and just under 67,000 workers covered by those WorkShare plans. On a final note, we hear those of you who are worried about the end of the federal relief program, and we share your concern and know how difficult this is. We're committed to moving as quickly as we can if Congress approves additional benefits. We're focused on getting everybody the benefits they qualify for and doing so as quickly as possible. And we'll share additional information as soon as it becomes available. With that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, David. Now I'm going to open up the lines to the reporters who have RSVP'd. Remember, if you're joining us by phone, make sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself. If you have any issue getting your question in, please email it to oed_communications@oregon.gov. First, I'm going to hand it over to Peter Wong with Pamplin Media.
Hi, David. Thanks. This question was brought up last week, and I think it was also brought up during the governor's recent availability. I gather nothing came out, the discussions about tapping any sort of state funds as a stopgap for the federal benefits that will be expiring after December 26th. I gather there are too many questions or too many complications involved in doing anything like that, such as tapping a source of money, for example.
Sure. So I'm not aware of any plans right now to do that. I know that there have been discussions and that things are moving quickly with the special session scheduled for next week. But you're right, there are a lot of complications, including finding money to pay the benefits and finding ways to administer it that wouldn't put at risk the other programs that we're already administering. Making sure that it didn't run afoul of the federal requirements that would then put the other CARES Act programs or the regular unemployment insurance funding from the federal government at risk. So at this point, it doesn't look like that is being actively pursued, although I know people have talked about it. And we're really depending on Congress, who provided the CARES Act, to get something passed before those programs expire. We're certainly anxious to see that happen. We know that, like I said, there's tens of thousands of people depending on those benefits. And it's certainly creating anxiety for them. to see the end of those benefits and to have seen this coming for several months, with Congress not yet extending those benefits, but we're hopeful that that will happen possibly any day now.
Okay, a related question, although it's a smaller point. I think one of the House proposals was to implement a technical fix for your department on tapping fraud control funds, having to do with any overpayments made out the lost wages, because it tied to FEMA. So I assume that's the lost wages program. Is that bill? Do you anticipate that bill being taken up in the session?
So we're hopeful that it will be taken up during this special session. Again, I think things are moving very quickly as they work on exactly what will be taken up during the special session. We've talked to legislative leadership about the need for this. I think they understand that, but I know that they have a number of complex policy issues on their plate. This is really to make sure that Oregon has a way to pay FEMA the money that we need to, that was kind of an obligation that was undertaken in order to get the hundreds of millions of dollars of lost wages assistance benefits that we've paid out to Oregonians.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Peter. Next, we have Kate Davidson with OPB.
Hey, there's so many questions about what's going on in Congress right now, but if a bill were to pass that would allow repayment of PUA overpayments to be waived, is that something that Oregon would want to take advantage of? And under what circumstances would you want to waive those overpayments?
Sure. So it's something that we're looking at, and there are different proposals out there. We certainly would want to avoid creating hardship for anyone that we can. And most of the proposals that I've seen are giving states the ability to waive PUA overpayments if it was not an overpayment that was caused by the person. So if the overpayment was because somebody gave us inaccurate information or didn't give us relevant information, then it wouldn't be waived. But that if it wasn't their fault at all, it could be waived if collecting the amount. The phrase that I've seen in the proposed legislation is if it's against equity and good conscience. And that's a standard that we have in our state law that we already use to waive overpayments for regular unemployment when it wasn't the person's fault. So we're certainly interested. Exactly how it plays out would depend on what the legislation ultimately says, but some of the drafts have been pretty similar to what we already do for regular unemployment overpayments.
And do you know how much approximately has been overpaid in PUA in Oregon during the pandemic?
I don't have that figure. And frankly, there's kind of a normal course where we're still actively making payments, and frequently overpayments become overpayments because maybe a decision that we've made to allow benefits is overturned on appeal, or we get information later after we started paying benefits that shows the person didn't actually meet the eligibility requirements. So there's always some time lag between when we are making payments and when all of the overpayments are established and discovered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Next is Keaton Thomas with K2.
Hey, David. Good to talk to you. I guess not necessarily the most urgent question in terms of what's happening in Congress, but something that I've gotten at least one person asking about, and that is, can you explain to folks out there what the situation is with unemployment taxes as it relates to income, or unemployment as it relates to income tax that they may owe on that? My understanding is that people can withhold that, or they don't have to withhold that. And is there anything that you think folks should know right now as we're kind of at the end of the year, so maybe they're not surprised come, April?
Sure, a couple things might be helpful. Generally, unemployment benefits are taxable as income, and the regular benefits that we pay out and the other benefit programs that we've been paying out, people have the option of electing to have state and federal income tax withheld, like happens out of a paycheck. So for people that made that election, for instance, if they were entitled to receive $400 a week in benefits, they were receiving a little bit less than that because we were withholding some amount at their request and sending that to the Federal Internal Revenue Service or to the State Department of Revenue, and that has been applied towards their income tax obligations. If people didn't have amounts withheld, then the benefits that they received are still income, and we issue 1099-G forms to people as required by law. So if people didn't have any tax withheld out of their benefits, they should keep in mind that that is still taxable income, and depending on their circumstances, they may have some taxes that they have to pay when they file their 2020 taxes.
And just really generally speaking about just what we're waiting for in Congress, and is that just a simple question of, have you looked at, well, the latest I saw today was maybe a 1-month extension or a 2-month extension of unemployment benefits. Is that kind of what you've seen, or is there something that you would prefer to see coming out of any sort of COVID relief in terms of a length of time for an extension?
Well, we've seen a number of different proposals, and that's kind of the balancing act that we have of trying to be ready to move as quickly as possible, but not taking our focus away from getting benefits out to the people that are still waiting, and looking at all the different proposals that get floated. And then so far, unfortunately, none of them have actually come to fruition. Having a 1-month extension certainly provides much needed help to people. I don't think a month from now we're going to be out of the recession, and there's still going to be a lot of people that need to rely on benefits. So certainly having a longer term approach that doesn't require further congressional action and further changes to our programs would be easier for us to implement. And the key thing there is that that means that we're able to get the benefits out to people more quickly with fewer disruptions. If it's done on kind of a month-by-month basis, then each month there's that uncertainty for people not knowing if their benefits are going to expire, and the possibility that there might be a lapse while we have to make changes based on whatever the new legislation is.
Thanks, Keaton. Next, we have Lindsay Nadrich with COIN.
David, how much is left in the trust fund? And remind me again why that can't be used to kind of help bridge the gap for people.
So the balance of the trust fund is about $3.85 billion, which is a lot. It's down from about $5.1 billion at the start of the year. And the trust fund is money that's held by the federal government, and there are strict requirements about how that can be used. So, for example, one of the areas of big need, a lot of the people that will be losing benefits are the people that are on PUA, and those are people who can't get regular unemployment insurance. And federal law says that we're not allowed to use those trust fund monies to pay people who aren't eligible for unemployment insurance. It's very limited what we can use that money for, and without some other benefit program, those funds aren't available.
And then I know you kind of addressed this a little bit, but we've been waiting such a long time for Congress to take action. Yes, it looks like we're finally a little bit closer now. But when I talked to Senate President Peter Courtney yesterday about the special session, and I asked about, are you guys taking any action to help people on unemployment who are losing benefits? And he told me it wasn't something that came up. It wasn't even part of the discussion. Could you guys have advocated more to get help for Oregonians about to lose this? I know you said you're working with the Labor Department, but it just seems like people feel that they're not a priority when it wasn't even something that was being considered for the special session.
So I haven't been involved with all the discussions about what the priorities are for the special session. I think there are some things that we would not be able to do with state funding. And for instance, the PUA people are probably the best example. Besides needing to find a large amount of money in the state budget, we can't just then use that bank account to start paying benefits to the people that were on PUA. Because again, the federal law that created the PUA program has some very strict requirements, and we would essentially have to start rebuilding that program from scratch, meaning it would be like when the CARES Act first passed, and we had to come up with the PUA program and code that and build the application process. And that's something that would both take quite a long time to do and would take away the effort from people that are currently trying to get the waiting week paid and do a lot of the other key things to keep benefits flowing. It's unfortunately a situation where we know there are so many people that are in need, and this is really a national problem that Congress needs to step up to provide a solution for. And we're focused on being absolutely as ready as we can to get those benefits out as soon as there's a program that gets enacted into law.
Thank you.
Lindsay. Next is Mike Roggaway with the Oregonian.
Hi, David. You had updates today on the adjudication process and the number of regular UI claims that are still pending. Both those numbers are a lot smaller than they were. Do you have an estimate of how many claims in total are out there still requiring some kind of processing or untangling to figure out what is still owed and to how many?
I don't have that. That's something that we continue to try to find the best way to have a regular way to report on, and it's very challenging to do. And of course, we receive new claims every day, and every day we get new information on claims that were filed in the past that raise issues that we have to look at. So I don't have an exact number. And this isn't a precise estimate at all, but we are continuing to make progress in terms of like how quickly we're able to resolve those issues when they come up, because there's always going to be new people needing assistance and new issues that arise. Our goal is to get to the point where we are resolving all of those new issues and new claims absolutely as quickly as we can. For many parts of the process, we're doing that well, like the initial processing. Where the adjudication is that biggest area that has been the challenge. And again, we're certainly not to where we want to be yet, but we're making very significant progress on doing that. And if we're able to come up with a better way of kind of consistently reporting on how many people are waiting more than the kind of benchmark 3-week time period that a lot of the federal metrics are based on, we're certainly happy to share that, but we just don't have that reliably right now.
Do you have a ballpark estimate? Like earlier, you were able to give after a time ballpark estimate on PUA and adjudication. Is there something within a 10,000 number that you might be able to offer? I'm just trying to get a ballpark sense of what's still out there to be untangled.
Sure, I don't have that handy right now, and I really don't want to give any inaccurate information or a guess that is way off.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next we have Ellie Murphy with KBND News.
Hi, David. Thank you for taking my call. So this is kind of anecdotal. I was just speaking to somebody who was denied benefits at the beginning of the pandemic, and they just received a check. And I think the question is, how does one handle that once they've received a check from the employment department and they believe they have not become eligible for that? Do they just return the check? Do they tear it up? And how many people might be receiving these?
So in terms of what they should do, they should absolutely reach out to us to let us know. It may be that there was something where they're not actually eligible, and we would want them to send the check back. So that it doesn't cause further challenges for them or for us to have to try to get the money back. It could also be, for instance, there were some people that filed for benefits that claimed a waiting week and weren't eligible after that waiting week. And once we started paying the waiting week, they are actually eligible for that 1 week of payments. So it's hard to know with it just being that one anecdotal situation, what that person might be experiencing, whether they are actually eligible for those benefits. We did have quite a number of people who had only claimed the waiting week who have now either received or are in the process of receiving that waiting week payment. But I will highlight, if anybody gets a benefit that they think they're not eligible for, or that there's some mistake with their claim, they should reach out to us right away. The best way to do that is by using the Contact Us form on our website at unemployment.oregon.gov.
Thank you.
Ellie, next is Dick Hughes with the Hughesisms.
Thank you. First of all, David, I want to commend you and thank you for your patience in answering all of our questions. We really appreciate it. And my questions are things we've talked about before. As I understand it, for the PUA, the Employment Department enlisted Google, I think it was the Google company or a subsidiary, to help make those payments. Excuse me. Will that make it easier, assuming PUA is reauthorized, to use the Google system, or are we still just as reliant on changes being made in the traditional computer systems, for lack of a better word?
Sure. It does depend on what happens with the new legislation and how significant the changes are. Even with the new Google application that we're using, and that has been a vast improvement and made it much easier for us to get people their benefits more quickly, for people to submit their applications and their weekly claims. That is still connecting to our mainframe computer systems. So any change that is made, any reauthorization, will require some work in our legacy mainframe computer systems. That being said, we have that Google developed application process already connected to our mainframe system. So if it's relatively straightforward changes, like just changing the time period, just extending the expiration date beyond December 26th, that's a pretty straightforward change that we would be able to work through, make the changes, test to make sure it's working correctly, and that would be a much simpler change. If there are changes to the information that federal law requires people to give us each week when they file for weekly benefits or when they file their initial claim, that might take some modification of the Google application process, and it might take some more complicated changes to the mainframe. So I guess the short answer is, no matter what happens, we will have to make some changes to our legacy systems, which is one of the reasons that we in other states have been advocating so much for really keeping it as simple as possible and extending the current programs and not making really large substantive changes to how those operate.
So, and things may have changed since I last checked earlier this morning. But there's been some talk of decreasing like the PUA, well, reinstituting PUA, but changing the level from 600 to 300 or whatever. Is changing the amount of the weekly PUA benefit one of those things that would be more difficult?
So I think what you're talking about is probably one of the many acronyms that were out there. That was the FPUC program that gave an extra $600 for a period of time to people who were receiving any type of benefits, whether it was PUA or regular unemployment. We have seen proposals to reinstitute those plus-up payments, but it would be at a different dollar amount. It would take some work, certainly, to change the dollar amount. If it's a change like you described in some of the proposals we've seen, where it's changing it to $300, that is a much more straightforward change than some of the things that we were frankly really concerned about that would have taken months to implement. So if it's just reinstituting that and changing it from $600 to $300, we've implemented these types of programs multiple times now since the pandemic began. It would still take some time to do, but it's not one that would be running into the several months to do the coding and testing on.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Dick. Next, we have Angelina Dixon with KVAL.
Hey, David, I know the special session next week is a very anticipated event. Are we waiting to see if more relief funds will be approved or just benefit programs?
So in terms of the state special session, certainly if there's legislation that created a state benefit program, that would provide a new program for us to administer. We'd have to look into that. As I mentioned, I don't think that is anticipated. And from one of the prior questions, it sounds like the legislative leadership isn't anticipating that to happen next week. We're really looking to congressional action to create the new programs. That's the most likely route. Short of the new benefit programs, we're not really waiting on an additional distribution of money. The Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund that we can use to pay benefits when those programs are authorized, we are solvent, so we're not looking at having to borrow money or having to get an infusion of funds from some other revenue source at this point. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Tom Cusack with Oregon Housing Blog. Is Tom Cusack on the line? If you're joining by phone, you're going to hit *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, let's go on to Kevin McNamara with KTVL.
Yeah, hi. So I'm down here in Jackson County, and I'm just wondering, I noticed that was one of the counties that was going to be hit particularly hard by the expiration. I was wondering if there's a way to get a more specific breakdown on that. Was that just off raw numbers, and what kind of jobs potentially are these people doing?
Sure. In terms of the jobs, I don't know that we have it broken down by industry. Our research folks are really great at looking through data, and even when it's kind of a whole new program and circumstances that we've never dealt with, looking at what we can predict about the impact. We are seeing that some counties will be hit more heavily, and Jackson County is one where kind of a higher percentage of people will be losing benefits when the CARES Act programs end than the statewide average or in many other counties. Most of those people are people that are self-employed. So the people that were on the PUA program are by far the largest group of people that will be running out of benefits. And we don't really have data on the types of businesses that those people had. We are looking at what other types of information we can generate about this and share. But I think that's about the level of detail that I have kind of accessible at my fingertips.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. I'm going to try Tom Cusack one more time. Tom Cusack with Oregon Housing Blog.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had a glitch with my phone here. I was looking at some data that basically indicates there's something like 15 states that have used existing CARES Act funding to shore up their trust funds, and in some cases to reduce the future tax increases for employers. Are you aware of any other uses that states have made to extend benefit periods with money that they've put into the trust funds?
So your question is about whether other states have offered longer benefit periods or new programs using money that's in the state unemployment insurance trust funds?
Yes, if they've taken existing CARES Act money and put that into the unemployment insurance trust funds as a way of shoring them up to avoid paying tax, or borrowing money from the federal government, number one, and number two, to reduce future tax increases. I just wonder if there's other eligible uses once a state has taken CARES Act money and put it in the trust fund, that they could use it for some other purpose.
Sure. Once the money is put into the trust fund, once money from any source gets put into the trust fund, it's really restricted in what it can be used for by federal law. And it's really there to pay benefits out under the unemployment insurance programs that meet federal requirements. So some states have, as you mentioned, put CARES Act funds in using, I believe, usually coronavirus relief funds money into their state trust funds. Most states that have done that were states that were either becoming insolvent or at high risk of becoming insolvent and trying to avoid having to borrow money. So that was a way to put more money into the trust fund without having to incur interest expenses and other costs that get passed on to employers. We did do some rough math earlier to look at how much money would have had to have been put into Oregon's trust fund for us to be in a lower tax schedule for 2021 than Schedule 4, which is kind of the baseline tax schedule, which we will be at. And I don't have the number in front of me. I know it was well over $200 million. And ultimately that wasn't seen as, I don't think there was that much in coronavirus relief funds available, even if everybody had wanted to use it for that. And I think when they were looking at the other purposes that it was being used for to provide direct support for a number of people, businesses, industries, that direct support was looked like it was going to be more beneficial.